I'm going to get us started. It's 5 o'clock here in beautiful British Columbia. And where Kurt is, it's not 5 o'clock, it's 7 o'clock.
No, just 6. Just one hour ahead.
So we're all, it's happy hour, people. And this is the second art law talk that we are putting together. My name is Martha Rands, and I am the legal director of the Pacific Legal Education and Outreach Society that runs the Artist Legal Outreach Legal Clinic in Vancouver. We provide summary legal advice to artists in all disciplines across the province of BC. And after a few weeks ago, we thought we'd do some webinars, call them Art Law Talks, not unlike our Conversations About Copyright series that we did last year, and open up to the entire country, to anybody who wanted to participate and ask questions and talk copyright, talk art law shop law. Anyway, so welcome everyone. Welcome to our participants today. And just to let you know, there is a closed caption button indicating that closed captioning is available for today's webinar, as well as a Q&A box. And it is that box that you are going to want to enter in order to put your questions to Kurt. The framework today is we're going to I'm going to sort of position it, as it were, and then we're going to have a bit of a conversation, Kurt and I, about the vagaries of copyright, the vagaries of law, and then we'll open it up for questions. I encourage all of you to think up your best Stump the Lawyer questions. Before we get started, I just want to acknowledge that we today, at least where I am, we're on the unceded traditional territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, and Squamish peoples, and we thank them for their forbearance in allowing us to continue to play around in these playgrounds and these sandboxes today. So without further ado, also we're here with Kurt Dahl. He is, among many things, a drummer, a lawyer, a drummer lawyer, or maybe he's a lawyer drummer. I don't know if there's a precedent to this. Someone who is a songwriter. He has literally been on both sides of the music equation, if you will see it as an equation, or as on sides, which some of us don't see things as necessarily adversarial. It's just we all wear different hats at different times. And in this case, what we're going to be talking about, why we've titled this, Who Owns Sound, is because there's been some recent cases, recent media coverage of people claiming things, their ownership of things, or maybe that another person plagiarized their stuff, and responses galore. So our intrepid administrator, Angela, being as I like alliteration, is going to just introduce us to Ms. Cardi B. We need some audio. Okay,
there we go. 1 second.
Sorry about that.
Guess what, bitch? Coronavirus! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Shit is getting real! Shit is real! Coronavirus! Shit is real! Coronavirus!
That's great. So that gives us, you know, a way to just open up a conversation about what is that, and where's the law in that piece?
Yeah, what is that? That's a great question. What is that?
Well, it's a remix. It's music. It's an artwork. It's all of those things. Surely I can just do that with Cardi B, can't I?
Yeah, well, and that's, you know, this sort of it brings up many different cans of worms. But, you know, one of the first ones is, you know, her personality rights. You know, someone took a recording and a video of her video using her face and her likeness and her audio without her consent, right? And so that brings up sort of the sample element, which she obviously didn't give consent to in the remix. But then it also brings up, like, so is this plagiarism, or is it just sampling, or, you know, what's the difference, and how does it look from a legal perspective? So yeah, most importantly, it's whoever did that with the song, or sorry, with the original video, they didn't have consent to do it until after the fact, until they contacted her, and then of course she fought for a percentage of the songwriting, right? So is that songwriting? That's a great question too to bring up.
Is it? I hadn't thought of that. Is it songwriting? I mean, are we going to be so rarefied about the term songwriting that it has to conform to certain values? Or maybe it does. I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know about values, because I mean, values is sort of a funny thing, but, you know, I guess what the law would say in terms of what makes up a song. And I've written a lot of articles on this because I find it very fascinating as a songwriter, but also a lawyer. Like, what are the components of a song? Because you know, if you're the Beatles and you've got Lennon and McCartney writing lyrics and writing melodies, and you got George Harrison playing guitar and Ringo playing drums, it's kind of a bit easier. Like that's sort of like how I traditionally know songwriting, is like that. But these days, I mean, you can have someone just, like we just saw, taking a sample of a YouTube video and then putting a beat to it, and or you can have someone just like you know, playing a flute to, or someone making farting noises over a drum beat. You know, like,
someone or a guy? Sorry.
It could be either. I don't want to presume, but, you know, so the idea of what is songwriting is very different if you take it out of the sort of classic guitar or drums, piano, that kind of thing. So yeah, I find it fascinating. What is songwriting? So in this example with the Cardi B song, so she records a video on YouTube, posts it to her followers, kind of ranting about coronavirus or whatever. You know, she's getting the old cabin fever, and decides to put it on social media. So then someone else, let's pretend it's me, as producer, comes along and sort of hacks that up, samples it, puts a beat to it, you know, loops it, all that sort of stuff. What are the components of songwriting in that? Well, I would say, so usually you look at lyrics, melody, and music. So lyrics, I mean, I guess technically in this song, Cardi B wrote the lyrics because, you know, it's coronavirus and it keeps getting sampled. And music sounds like it's the producer. He put some sort of beat to it, etc. And then melody, I guess it's her, but, you know, because she kind of has the intonation in the coronavirus, the way she was saying it. So at the end of the day, it's, what I'm saying is the traditional notion of what is songwriting needs to be overhauled. And in this instance, you know, if I was Cardi B, I would say I want at least half of the songwriting on the song, and I would push for more because I didn't give consent to the producer to use my face and image and likeness and all that sort of stuff. So
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. What interested me about the story that I saw in the Rolling Stone, particularly that story about the story of Cardi B and coronavirus, was that the Rolling Stone really put it into the frame of negotiation. That there's, even though that there's going to be some form of negotiation around how to resolve the competing interests in the situation. And I recommend, and we're going to have a link to that article, because I think it's really informative about what happens in actuality when there is a conflict over this sort of thing, not unlike Blurred Lines and the Marvin Gaye estate, right? Where there was an argument and a negotiation.
yeah, and that's a great point, Martha. Like these things, it really does it all comes down to negotiation. So, you know, again, to go to the Cardi B example, if I was her lawyer, I would start with way more than half, because the song can't be used either in audio form or video form without her consent, because it's her likeness is being used, right? Her voice, her video. She never gave consent for them to use that. So her bargaining chip is, we'll just take the song down and neither of us make money, right? Like,
Right.
you know, you as producer turned it into a hit, which, you know, I guess, and that's his bargaining chip, is that, hey, there's no song here unless I came along and made it. You just had a YouTube rant or an Instagram rant. I made it into a hit that's making all this money. So again, that's what his lawyer's saying. And her lawyer's saying, we'll take it down right now. We'll issue a takedown notice and none of us make money. So,
Yeah.
I mean, at the end of the day, that's how these things work. It's you know, negotiating power and all that sort of thing. But I think with this example, it's one of those things that went viral and it starts making a lot of money. And then both sides are, okay, well, I guess let's discuss how this money is split. If I were them, I would have given it to charity. They should have given it to coronavirus, like, you know, something to help,
Yes. Yeah,
you know,
exactly.
deal with COVID-19. Like that would have been a great play and a great play from the heart. It's like, let's put all these millions of dollars towards charity.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
if they did that.
Yeah, I hadn't thought of it in that respect, but I think what you're saying reminds me a lot of the Sarah McLachlan and Newdorf case, because when you actually read the decision of the judge is parsing, you know, how much of the song belonged to Sarah McLachlan and how much was Daryl Newdorf's. And it really is, it's a chilling read for anyone who likes music, because we don't think of music in these stripped down terms that inevitably result when the legal system takes over, which is why I think it's also interesting that when we often hear these stories in the media, they talk about plagiarism, not necessarily copyright infringement. Why is that such a prevalent term, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure, but I guess part of it is maybe the word plagiarism sort of gets people's attention. You know, it's sort of a, you know, it's almost a taboo word, but you're right. And I think, you know, what I loved, you know, I find this stuff fascinating, you know, because I am a songwriter but I deal with these plagiarism cases all the time as a lawyer. So I get to see it from both sides. And, you know, with the Tom Petty and Sam Smith case, to me, that's a great contrast to all the sort of litigation that happened with Robin Thicke and Marvin Gaye, and with the Led Zeppelin case. Both those cases, litigation, and at the end of the day, lawyers make a ton of money, and it costs the artist a lot of money, right? And to me, that's like, I never want to see that. I don't want to see lawyers winning and artists losing. To me, that's like, that's a horrible situation. With the Tom Petty, Sam Smith case, you know, Sam Smith released a song. It was a huge hit. I forget the title right now, but it was like one of the big breakthroughs, and it copied the Tom Petty melody. And so Sam Smith reached out, or his lawyers reached out to Tom Petty and said, or no, I think Petty's lawyers reached out and said, hey, there's a real similarity here. And Sam Smith said, okay, you're totally right. You know, basically lawyers weren't really involved. It was like Sam Smith called Tom Petty and said, hey, my song came out. I'd never heard your song. He was 22 when he wrote his song, and he never heard Tom Petty. I think it was Free Fallin' or Won't Back Down. Won't Back Down it was. Which, as a side note, if you're 22 and you haven't heard I Won't Back Down, you've had a rough upbringing, I would say. But so basically they said, let's not take this to court. I messed up. You know, these ideas are out there in the universe, and this is my real position: is there's only so many different melodies out there, only so many chord progressions. Now that doesn't mean it's a free for all. You can just go steal Led Zeppelin, Stairway to Heaven, and steal Hotel California and claim it as your own. But it's a sliding scale. So Sam Smith said, "Listen, I messed up. I didn't realize it. The song came out, and turns out it's your melody." So he gave Petty, I think, 12.5% of the songwriting. Petty was happy with it. But the most important thing is Tom Petty said, considering the state of the world right now, this is hardly news, which I thought was really, you know, I love Tom Petty. And for him to say that, it's just, what a great Tom Petty thing to say. It's like, listen, people are dying of starvation. There's wars going on. There's Donald Trump in power. This is hardly news, you know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So they avoid the whole court system, you know?
Yeah, I thought that, and another link that we will share is this recent piece penned by Nick Cave. And his point is that he says, you know, everyone steals. At the same time, it's what you do with it that matters. And that actually flies, that's consistent with what the case law in the United States says around transformative use. If the taking of the material, so in other words, if the guy who took the Cardi B stuff made a new meaning out of the stuff, and then it is capable of being considered transformative. And that is tremendously freeing to artists, I think, across the board, because it acknowledges that we are always building on what came before. And, you know, even I was at a show of a folk artist, for lack of a better word, Moira Smiley, who played, and Moira Smiley and Jamie Stone worked together on a whole series of recordings based on the Lomax recordings. Alan Lomax being a great ethnomusicologist. And she said, you know, when they were going through those recordings, that they, on the one hand, felt they had to honor the past and then give it a new flip, a new flavor, another way of seeing it, a new meaning to it. And I thought, you know, and then she says, and please buy my merch because I need to make a living, you know? Like, so there's a reality to this, that somewhere we got to make sure that there's a royalty stream that goes to artists and musicians. At the same time, there's a reality to how music is made, and all art forms, but certainly music being the most obvious, because it seems like, you know, it's often a few notes, it's a chord progression. It seems very de minimis, you know, when you actually get right down to it.
Yeah, it really is. Like, it's such a fine line. And that's what I say. I get emails every other day from someone saying, I think so and so stole my song, you know, and yeah, like it's a fine line. Like I agree with Nick Cave in a lot of ways that it's the sort of this. I mean, it goes to the argument of, or the philosophical argument that there is no original thought. You know, I mean, every thought is out there. We just soak it in from the universe and then put our own maybe filter on it or spin on it. But if you go down that path, I mean, you know, if you go down that too far, then also there's no protection of any artist's work, and I don't think that, like, that leaves no revenue coming into artists, which none of us want, right? If you're a starving artist and you finally write that song that connects with a million people, and you finally have some food on the table, and then some other artist just steals that song, you know, there has to be some protection of it. But the question is how much, to what extent does that protection exist? So I feel like, yeah, you know, Led Zeppelin ripped off all the early blues artists. You know, the Beatles ripped off Chuck Berry and Buddy Holly. And then it just cycles down from there. I mean, you know, Greta Van Fleet is really under the microscope now for being a Led Zeppelin ripoff. So they're ripping off Led Zeppelin, who's Led Zeppelin admits to being a blues ripoff. So it's sort of like,
Yeah.
You pass it down the line, right?
Yeah. At a certain point, it becomes kind of ridiculous. At the same time, given that remuneration, routes to remuneration or routes to getting paid have narrowed so significantly for a great many people, given the amount that you're paid when your work is streamed, it's kind of, it's like you can't fault people for trying to hold on for the little bit of pie that they've got, you know.
Well, like there's one judge that said this quote once, that it was in regard to some pornography case in Canada, but, like, you know, the quote is, "I don't know what pornography is, but I know it when I see it." And I use that quote often for plagiarism, like, or copyright infringement. You know, there's no definition of it. You can't say, here's the test. I mean, there is a rough test, of course, but, you know, I don't know what it is, but I know when I hear it, you know. And there's songs that I hear on the radio now where I think that's totally, you know, Beatles, obla-dee, obla-da, or whatever, right? But maybe McCartney just didn't want to bother suing, or, you know, there's always that factor too. I mean, maybe the infringed artist doesn't want to even worry about it, you know. I'd be curious about Nick Cave, you know, if someone took one of his songs and full on stole it and was making $1 million off it, would he still be so laissez-faire about you know, copyright? I wonder. But it's to me, it's fascinating. And sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's always interesting when the shoe is on the other foot.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah,
and
exactly.
and it is about, I mean, I think Geddy Lee said something really interesting in Copyright Criminal.
Love Geddy. Yeah.
He basically said Rush is making so much fucking money, pardon my French, that this is simply not an issue for them. And he made a point of saying, we are one of the few acts that are in this position. If musicians or other artists were paid appropriately from the outset, if there was a remuneration stream that enabled presumably talented ones to make a living, then the need to zealously defend one's copyright would be muted. I mean,
I love that.
And for anyone who's watching or listening later, the film Copyright Criminals is full of moments of real, you know, realness of all these musicians talking about why they do what they do and how to have, you know, sort of George Clinton has a moment where he says, well, these tracks you can do whatever you want with. These tracks pay for my kids to go to university. That's it. And it's very honest about their position as not just the musician, but rather, I have a family to feed, I have a job, this is a job, and I need to make a living, which is getting harder. So I see we have a question, so I will see what the question is. There are people that copy video footage and pictures and make their own YouTube videos and then say they have the right to do it. Oh, this is interesting. For scientific purposes. Lots of Sasquatch videos about this kind of stuff. What about in Canada? What's your opinion about scientific purposes and copyright infringement? Well,
Yeah,
that's
well,
interesting. What is that about Sasquatch? Is it,
well,
does that mean they're like taking images of Sasquatch and then who's got copyright in Sasquatch?
well, clearly the Sasquatch's estate. No, I'm not sure about the Sasquatch part, but I love the question. I love that. You know, because yeah, someone, right, whoever took that footage, I guess, would own that copyright, right? Like, so whoever got the shot of Bigfoot owns that footage. So it's, you know, it's a fair question. You know, there is always sort of this idea of the fair use or fair dealing in Canada doctrine. So for scientific or journalistic, you know, sort of critical purposes. So that's, I get asked this often, you know, I'm putting on a music video as a band, let's say, and I've got footage from, you know, CNN talking about whatever, Trump or, you know, something, or JFK or whatever. Can I put this at the beginning of my video or in the middle of the video, whatever? And there is the fair use, fair dealing exception. So you can put, you know, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 seconds of other footage throughout the video. And yeah, I mean, it's not exactly defined how much time you get, but in theory, you could have a video that had a clip of a Sasquatch, a clip of on CNN, a clip of from the Simpsons cartoon or whatever.
I wouldn't do that.
Yeah. I mean, you could do it, but you'd have to be very, like, I'd do your research on it before.
Yeah, I mean,
how much you include,
the reality is that under fair dealing, there's no such thing as a scientific purpose. There's research, there's private study, and there's a real question about whether or not something like this would qualify. I think it wouldn't. On its face, what is being described, I'm like, you can call it scientific purposes. Putting something up on YouTube is not scientific. And so I think you might have a problem there. Also, I think that fair dealing has been construed very narrowly in Canada. So if we were in the United States, it is a different milieu because this concept of transformative use exists in US case law. It doesn't exist in here. So you could go to a lawyer, right, with your Sasquatch video, and you know, you'll get two very different, well, you get very different opinions always, but you'll get different opinions depending on whether you're in Canada or whether you're in the US. You know, on the other hand, the reality is that, is there any money being made off of this? Does anybody really care? And if the answer to that is more or less no, then the risk goes down significantly. What I found interesting about the Cardi B one that we showed was Bugs Bunny is in there. Yeah. And I'm like, whoa, now there's the problem, right?
Yeah, he doesn't come cheap.
Yeah, it's like, in order to license a clip of Bugs Bunny, you know, there's your $50,000 budget blown, right? So I'm like, And I do see that on occasion here, where people are like, they try. Now, you could argue it's de minimis. That means it's very, very small. It's, you know, sure, you could try, but, you know, if it's a really you know, like, and there was another one, there was Elmo in there too.
That's right.
Yeah. And I'm
He's
like,
not cheap either.
yeah, I'm like, dude, you know, like, maybe not doing that, or on the other hand, you just don't give a fuck, so you just put it up. And there's a lot of stuff on the interwebs that just sits there, and it gives people the impression that somehow this must be okay because I can look at it, when in fact, just because you can find it doesn't mean that there aren't potential legal issues with it.
Well, and that's what I often say is, like, the second real money starts to flow in because of it, that's when the lawyers come out, right? And so, you know, of the emails I get every week saying, I think someone stole my song. Usually I listen to the two songs, and I get, it's a slight similarity, but not enough. But then the second thing I say is, well, how much money is at stake here? You know, so I had someone contact me a couple months ago saying, I swear Blue Rodeo infringed my song. And I listened to the two songs and heard a slight similarity in the melody, but it was like a Blue Rodeo, like B side, like C side. It's low in their catalog. Not even like, you know, they don't even play it live. It's that insignificant in terms of their catalog. So I said, even if you wanted to, you know, fight this, you're gonna like hire a lawyer, spend $5-10 grand to get a big case together, and for what? Because their original song, like the Blue Rodeo song, you know, has maybe earned a couple $1,000. So like there is that monetary aspect of it. Is it worth it at all? And I guess some people, it's like the principle is what matters, to show that someone ripped you off. But yeah, I mean, to your point on the fair use and all that sort of stuff, I mean, it really does come. There's always a consideration of what's the cost, and is it worth it?
Yeah. Yeah. So are there any other questions out there in question land? I think people are going to be shy. Going once. Okay. So let's see. I need to think up a question, I think. So what is the future of music? There's a big one for you.
Just a small question for me.
Like, I mean, you know, well, let's, okay, so you know, we had a big report from Canadian Heritage, and one of their remits was remuneration models for artists, right? And, you know, there's a lot of concern, right? Especially right now, Jesus, you know, you can't perform anywhere. Your incomes are shit. You know, what you're going to tour? There's no touring. And, you know, I think there's, you know, and so CBC has started a streaming site for Canadian artists. The City of Vancouver did the same. They've created some, or BC with Creative BC has started some sort of streaming service, all to get these infinitesimal royalties to people like you. Well, yeah, like, great. Yeah. And where do you feel are the real potentials here?
Yeah, well, that's, you know, I guess the future of music, you know, obviously is a big question. I mean, the future of copyright infringement, like that, let's just tackle that for a second, because I feel like it's interesting, because I see more and more of these plagiarism cases coming up, right? So the question is, are we getting to a point where, like, every song you release as an artist, you have to worry that someone's going to sue you? because that's not good either. Because then that's the whole balance with copyright, is the balance between protecting writers, authors, but then allowing new authors and writers to come along, right? It's that balance, right? You know, if we had a really harsh copyright system, then there'd be no good new music coming out, because everyone would be infringing or afraid to infringe, right? So I think part of it, honestly, I think there's, you know, parties are more litigious than they were before. And maybe it's because there's less money, like you said, to artists. So if someone steals your song, you're more likely to sue than maybe an artist was in the 60s, 70s, 80s, whatever. And again, I think there's more access to all types of music. So you can find at the tip of your fingertips any song in the universe, in theory, whereas maybe in the 60s, 70s, etc., it wasn't as easy to find. You know.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then it's also easier to sample and take from it, right? You know, in the 60s, 70s, whatever, you couldn't just, the technology wasn't there to be able to like splice and cut and all that stuff. So, but there's always this worry that anytime, like for example, with the Marvin Gaye, Robin Thicke verdict, where they found Robin Thicke guilty of plagiarism, there's always this worry that you hear that it's going to kill creativity, and to me that's a bit reactionary, a bit over the top, because creative people are always going to want to create. They're always going to create. They're not even going to, if there's a chance of being, you know, sued for plagiarism. Like you got something to say, you're going to say it, you know. And yeah, so I don't think it's going to kill creativity, but I do think that if you're in the hip hop and pop genres, which tend to sample more, I think it has maybe changed the dialogue and changed the thought process before you release a song. You know, I think now labels and publishers are saying, like, where'd you get this idea? Yeah. Where'd you get this beat from?
Where'd you get this beat? Where'd you get that? Yeah, I mean, watching Copyright Criminals is really interesting, because it's all about sampling, and Camber McLeod, the director, is friends of Chuck D, and it tells a really interesting story of the history of hip hop. Last year, Chuck D was here at the film festival, and he talked about the song "Fight the Power." He did it it was some podcaster from San Francisco. And her podcast is all about deconstructing songs, and it was fascinating. I mean, and you know, and he's very forthright about what we were doing then we couldn't do now, or we would do it differently. And
there's a lot of samples on it, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, having been to see Public Enemy back in the day, it was a wall of sound. It was a wall of sound, and there's really nothing discernible in the sense of a song. It was sample upon sample upon sample, except that there was this underlying mind behind it all that knew how to do that. And to listen to him deconstruct the song was amazing. You know, it was brilliant. He's a brilliant guy, and he is a brilliant musician. Because he had such a deep knowledge of all of the work that he was using. And I found that working with remix artists that I've worked with, their profound knowledge of the genre is like mind-blowing, you know. And they are, you know, in my experience, not interested in claiming copyright per se. They just want the ability to make their work and make a living, right? So, you know, the problem is that the litigious nature, particularly in the United States, has made this riskier business than it might otherwise be, you know. And it's like, even when Pharrell Williams was talking about
Blurred
the
lines.
blurred lines, he said they knew what they were doing. And he said he didn't expect it to blow up as become this huge song. He was like, they were prepared for the possibility that they might get sued, but they were not prepared for it to become this monster.
How much? Yeah, for 8 million or whatever it was. Yeah.
Yeah. So,
Yeah.
had they sought permission from the estate, they would have probably ended up with a lot less, both in legal fees and ultimately in a payout. But they did try to argue, of course, as you know, fair use. And but I gotta say, the Marvin Gaye estate, when I saw the interviews with them at the time, they just came across as like really poor people who like Marvin Gaye got screwed a lot. And that's the other side of the equation when you start talking about a lot of African American artists, is they really got screwed out of the royalties that they should have had in the first place.
Yeah. It's so interesting. There's, you're so right. It goes back to, it really is. And I've read some articles on this, that in a lot of ways, the music industry in the early days was very, reflective of slavery in America. Like all the great African American artists continued to be exploited by these rich white men in suits, and it's really sad. I mean, all my idols were exploited by these corporate machines, right? And
James Brown
and Howlin' Wolf.
Yeah.
Howlin' Wolf was a great businessman. Him and his wife.
Did he own the rights to his music?
Yeah, and he died happy and well off. Which is, it's a shame that that's the exception. And same with James Brown. Yeah, he knew what he was doing. He was a ruthless businessman. And
he screwed Curtis Littlefield.
Yeah.
The funky drummer. You're a drummer.
Yeah.
Totally screwed him.
But it's a shame that like these success stories are the exception. And that's a whole other video, and that's a whole other podcast we could do about how the powers that be in the music industry, it really is exploitive. And so I think, and to go back to the Robin Thicke case, it's interesting because they preemptively, based on their lawyer's advice, preemptively sued the Gaye estate, which is interesting because it wasn't like the Gaye estate heard the song and then sued them. It was, they preemptively started a lawsuit against the Marvin Gaye estate saying, we recognize similarities here, but we're going to give you this amount and that's it. And if you don't take this offer, we'll give you nothing. And that's when the Marvin Gaye estate said, oh shit, there's something happening here. Let's hire lawyers. And they dug their feet in and they won. So it's so much different than the Tom Petty, Sam Smith thing, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, the preemptive action was to seek a declaration that it was covered by fair dealing.
Okay, so there was no offer in terms of songwriting. Yeah, see, they should have, in my opinion, they should have offered a cut of the pie.
Well, they did. They did initially, right? Because they filed the fair dealing action to say, oh no, it's fair dealing. And that set them up for a conversation about settlement. Only the Marvin Gaye estate was like, wait, just hold the phone here, dudes. And as you know, and they would have submitted the settlement offer as the Thicke and what have you, Pharrell Williams, they submitted the offer as part of the lawsuit. But the lawsuit was actually to get a declaration that it was caught by fair dealing. So
so did they offer a percentage of the songwriting, like initially?
That I don't remember, but whatever it was rejected.
Mm-hmm.
And that was actually also what happened. There was a game that was a game thing like a what are they called? Not Jenga blocks, but there was a company in San Francisco and they were creating Meccano things, not Lego, but they're sort of pieces of wood and you build stuff. And they
Mechanic?
used the Beastie Boys, Girls as the song for the ad. And they had these prepubescent girls and girls and and they changed the words a little bit, and it was supposed to be very much about empowering girls. So it was a Meccano set for girls. So it had pink on it, and it went out on the Super Bowl. This is, I don't know, 5 years ago. And the Beastie Boy community, the community of people who follow the Beastie Boys, went nuts because Adam Yauch, when he died, it was in his will, no commercial use of our work ever. And on top of that, the Beasties wrote a letter saying, like, we didn't agree to this, you must stop this right now. And there was such a monumental backlash that the company pulled the ad.
That's so interesting. It's a great story.
Yeah, it was like they had no idea what they were dealing with, and it was even weirder because the song that they used for the ad, right, is a parody of something else. So it didn't really work as a parody of a parody. It just, but they ultimately but they also had when the day of the Super Bowl, their lawyers went into court to seek a declaration that the using of the music was covered by fair dealing. They were ready. I mean, it was, and I said, was teaching a class up at UBC, and I was like, look, you have to understand, it would have cost them at least $100,000 to get these lawyers to be prepared to do this on short notice in order to prepare for this. So they knew exactly what they were doing and did it anyway. But it was the fans, not litigation, not the threat of lawyers that did them in. It was the fans that just said, we will never buy this. People who had supported them on Kickstarter were like, we like the Beasties more than this toy. It was a disaster. So
they lost not in court, but in the court of public opinion.
Yeah, which is what happens when you make, here with the Olympics, the International Olympic Committee wrote some really nasty letters to some local businesses that have, Greek businesses that are using the Olympic rings. And there was a backlash. So there was no litigation ever commenced, and there was no action taken against any of them because they were seen as being very heavy-handed. So there's a funny question here, very specific, not so much to the music question, but in countries that adhere to the 70 years after death rule, copyright has fallen from the works of Grey Owl, otherwise known as the Hastings, England-born Archie Bellamy. Europeans may now add his King of the Beaver People and Indian legends and lore to their public domain bookshelves, because I'm sure they all will. So why should a person have to pay a license fee to the National Film Board?
That's a great question. And Grey Owl is, his cabin is in northern Saskatchewan, which is close to my cabin near Prince Albert. So I know Grey Owl quite well. So basically, this is not, my typical area of expertise, but so you're saying his book is no longer copyright on it. So why should a person have to pay license fee to that?
Because the movie was made, and we are still in a 50 years after death.
Oh, the footage. Okay. Right. So,
So it's video footage that it was a film that the National Film Board made of Grey Owl, right? I think that's.
oh, sorry. Yeah. Sorry. I was thinking it was writing, but yeah. So it's footage. Okay. So does the National Film Board have additional rights to it? Like, has there been?
Well,
That'd be my question. Did they, register a different copyright on it? Like,
no, I can answer that sort of, at least from, I think the reality is that we are still in the public domain begins after 50 years after death. Once the new NAFTA agreement is enforced in this country, then it will be 70 years. But it will not apply retrospectively, I don't think. So it'll take some time for works like Grey Owl to be seen to be, definitely in the public domain. Right now, it is not in the public domain because in Canada, we have yet to adopt that provision. We will soon enough, but we haven't right now. And what the National Film Board is trying to monetize is its collection of works. And then, so there's a follow-up here, and he says, or they say, museums and archives sell usage rights on things they hold, even though they are in the public domain. Yes, they do. The Vancouver Art Gallery sells prints of artworks that are in the public domain, whether or not the photograph was commissioned by them or not. Absolutely. Why? Because they need money. It's a way to generate revenue. I think the National Film Board has made available a lot of its films for free download, but not all of them. And one of the reasons that they haven't gone with all of them is actually because the music rights in those films were granted for a limited period of time. So, for example, there's a film which was made about by Erlen Weissman of this history of lesbians in Canada, basically. And there's a clip in the film which has, I'm going to get it wrong, it's not Judy Garland, it's some sort of 50s, it'll come back, Peggy Lee. And what happened is that when they made the film, they got a license for X period of time. The film board wanted to make it available on its service, but they could not clear the music rights without paying an additional amount to whichever publisher it was who controlled the rights to the song. I think it might have been Peggy Lee. Anyway, it was one of those, and it would have cost a lot to either to get the rights, and for whatever reason, they would not also allow the director to just excise it from the soundtrack, which is, I think, really dumb on the NFB's part. But it's partly because the NFB has not had the resources to deal with each and every potential copyright clearance in all of these old films. So, and they're a bureaucracy, so they're deciding not to allow certain films to get seen usually because of music clearances. It's a big problem, music clearances.
Oh yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So thanks for asking the question. It's I think we're getting, I will say, since I know quite a bit about the open archive that the National Film Board has put out, they have actually put a lot of stuff up and are making it available. The difficulty is one where it's actually a big task to make sure that all of these T's are crossed and I's are dotted, particularly given that we are still in recovery from 10 years of Stephen Harper, without being personal about it. But, you know, the underfunding to those institutions was significant over that period. And we are at 5:57. So I think we will call it a night. And thank you so much, Kurt, for agreeing to talk to us about Cardi B and coronavirus. I hope that your family stays well, and the same for all of our participants. And
Thanks
we
for having
look
me.
forward to seeing you again next week, where we talk about everybody's favorite topic, artist estates. What to do with an estate of an artist after they die. How fun is that?
It's a bit morbid.